Hey guys, welcome back here to Intuitive Angling, and appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to watch today's episode. And guys, today we got a good swim jig primer for y'all. At the time of filming this video, we're in the first part of March, and I like to use a swim jig once that water temperature starts to get into the 50s. Not very far, from that. In fact, you may be in the 50s in some part of the country if you live down a little bit farther south. Here in my part of the country, we're still in the upper 40s. But once you get into March and April, and that water gets in the 50s and 60s, that swim jig is a great lure to catch them. So I'm gonna give you guys just a little primer for swim jig fishing in the spring. And swim jig fishing in the spring is different than swim jig fishing like in the summer and the fall time of the year. So we're just gonna specifically gear it towards the spring time of the year in today's episode here. I'm also, guys, today I'll be talking about the Megabass Ouzo Swimmer swim jig. Show you what the one looks like here. This is absolutely the best swim jig I have ever used before. Megabass Ouzo Swimmer. It's got a nice, the patented fish head design from Megabass. Hand-tied skirt here, nice thin weed guard. It's got a nano-coated hook with a nice little keeper on here that you'll never lose a trailer on there. And it's also got a little spinner on here for added traction. So I'll put the Megabass Ouzo Swimmer swim jig in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. If you guys would like to order a couple after the video, you can use that link and really appreciate that. Okay, now swim jigs work pretty much all year long, anytime the water temperature's over about 55 degrees. You can catch fish on a swim jig pretty much all year long except in the wintertime. Winter times are not gonna be that great because the fish aren't that shallow, but anytime that you have water temperatures in the 50s, you're gonna have a population of fish living in shallow water that can be caught on a swim jig. Now, let me give you a little backstory on this, because I was like one of the first people that really got in on this swim jig bite. This was a long time ago. Let me tell you how it formed, to the modern day version we see now. I was at a tournament at Lake Dardanelle in Arkansas, and this was back probably sometime in the mid 80s down there. And I was flipping a jig, with a pork frog, a 1/2 ounce black and blue jig with a black pork frog on it, into shallow grass there at Lake Dardanelle. And at this point, you got to understand, nobody had ever heard swim jig. It's like that was not even a thing. There wasn't even a lure called a swim jig back in the mid 80s. All there was a jig. So I was flipping, it was a summertime tournament. It was like a July tournament, and I was flipping this shallow grass. And it's like, all of a sudden, it's like a couple different times I flipped it in there and I pulled it out and started reeling it back to the boat to make another flip. And a bass grabbed it as I was swimming it out of the shallow grass. So I'm just thinking, oh, that's a fluke. And it happened like 3 or 4 times that day. I'd flip that jig into some like shallow gator grass or something like that. And I'd work it a couple times and I'd start to reel it in to make another pitch. And as I was reeling it in and that jig was just under the surface, those fish had come up and grab it. So it didn't take Einstein to figure out they want this jig swam. So I started doing that back in the mid 80s, guys. And I had it to myself for several years in a row. Nobody was doing it. Gradually it caught on, more people started doing it. And eventually you started having an entire line of swim jigs made. Now the difference is, I was doing it just with, my standard, Blaukat Throwback flipping jig type of a setup. Back then it was an Alron jig, but it was I was swimming a flipping jig, which it'll work. But the new modern era of swim jigs like Megabass makes with the fish head design, it makes that bait go straight through the water. And also the thin weed guard and smaller diameter hook gives you better hookups with it. So that's sort of the evolution with it. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about spring swim jig fishing versus swim jig fishing at different times of the year. A lot of it has to do with color. Now there's 3 primary colors that I use with my swim jigs. One is, and I'm gonna show you guys here in a second, one is some type of a white or a pearl, a black, and a green pumpkin. Now I'm not gonna talk about the green pumpkin because the green pumpkin is sort of a summer color. Because a green pumpkin with some orange and chartreuse in it resembles a bluegill or a perch, and that's what I use like July, August into the summer months. But this time of year, all I use is the shad pattern and the black ones quite a bit. Occasionally I would use a green one, but not very often. Most of the time it's the shad or the black. So let me show you my 2 different ways, my 2 different favorite ways to rig this up. The first one, this is the black Megabass Ouzo Swimmer here, black and blue. and I rig it up with a Zoom, this is a Z crawl, or excuse me, a Zoom speed crawl in a green pumpkin color. Now, occasionally I'll use a black and blue trailer, but they really like, guys, this combination in the springtime. This green pumpkin trailer on the black and blue really works good. That's one setup, and I'll explain to you when. And then my other setup is, any type of a shad pattern like this, something white or pearl with that, and I'll use the Zoom Z-Crawl Junior on it, which is my favorite trailer for that. Now, I'll use the Z-Crawl Junior sometime on the other one, but I don't know, something about that speed crawl that really works good on the black and blue. And then I'll have, just the white pearl trailer like this with the Z-Crawl Junior. So here's my two rig setups right here. And I use a lot of different weights just depending upon how the wind is and how deep I want to fish it. But that's my two primary springtime colors right there. So this is going to be the black with the green pumpkin. This is going to be for a little bit cleaner water application. So if I've got water visibility that's like, say, over 1.5 feet or something like that, like 15 inches of visibility in the water, I'm usually using the black with the green pumpkin trailer. It's a little bit more subtle. The green really neutralizes it and makes it not quite stand out so much. But I do trim this. I don't got this one trimmed, but I'll trim the skirt back quite a bit so I can see quite a bit of the trailer. But this is the color I use, a little bit cleaner water. And then if the water's stained or if it's dirty, something like that, I'll use some type of a pearl or a white. That's the combination that I'd use for that. Hold on one second, guys. I got to get my wife's text here. Okay, sorry about that. I had to get a text here real quick, guys. So anyway, that's the situation with that. Low light conditions, cloudy days, water visibility under about 1.5 feet. This is the one that you want to work here. Now, there's two different things as far as one of the important things about fishing a swim jig, if you haven't, is how you work a swim jig. Now, you don't want to just throw a swim jig out there and reel it in. And another thing with it is you're going to get a lot more bites on a swim jig if you keep it in sight about half of the time and not in sight about half the time. So, in other words, based upon my water visibility, what I like to do is I like to keep that swim jig high enough up in the water column where I can see it occasionally, and then maybe it'll dive out of sight and comes back in sight. So it's not necessarily, it's okay. I mean, I'm not saying you can't catch them, keep it in sight all the time, because you can, but I like it where it pops in and out of sight. It's sort of like that up and down motion really triggers the strike. So the way that you work it is sort of like this. You want to throw it out there like that. You want to keep your rod tip high. And the thing about it is, what helps you with a swim jig a lot, guys, is put a swim jig on a flipping stick. Because if you put it on a flipping stick, and I usually use 20, 25 pound test Seaguar and BizX fluorocarbon, it allows you to keep that bait slower, higher in the water column. If you have a shorter rod, say for example, if you throw that out there with a 7-foot rod and you start reeling it like this, you have to reel it a lot faster. But if you have a flipping stick, and you throw it out there and you keep that flipping stick at about 11 or 12 o'clock, you can reel it a lot slower through that real shallow water, which is really key to catching them a lot of times, especially if the water is off colored. So I'll throw it out there, I'll make my cast. As soon as it hits the bottom, I start reeling it, and I'm shaking it like that. Look at my rod tip here. I'm shaking it while I reel it like that. So my reel is just sort of like this, coming through the water. Occasionally I'll drop it down a second, I'll pop it back up and just shake it like that. And this shaking technique, it's sort of going to go across the water like that a little bit. It's not just going to go straight across the water. It really triggers the strikes. I mean, that's a big thing with it. So never just throw your swim jig out and reel it, along there. That you can trigger the fish by how you work that swim jig more than anything else. Now, the only time that I will drop a swim jig down, out of sight, is if I'm fishing some shallow submergent vegetation. So let's say, for example, I'm fishing down south where there's grass that's anywhere between 2 to 3 or 4 foot under the water. A lot of times I'll take that swim jig and I'll just slow roll it over the top of the grass. I don't really want to fish it up high, but in a normal man-made impoundment where I'm fishing shallow targets on the bank, I definitely want to keep that bait shallow, and I want to keep it high. In the springtime of the year also, they can be anywhere. It's like, you don't have to throw a swim jig next to a target, although it can be really good, but I fish everything. I stay in spawning type coves. That's what I'm looking for. I get into those big coves that I think those fish are spawning. I'll fish everything in there. I'll put my trolling motor down at the mouth of the cove. I'll take that swim jig, I'll cast it out there. If there's a dock, I'll swim it by the dock. If there's a lay down tree, I'll swim it by the lay down tree. If I'm on a stretch that just has some bare rocky bank or gravel, I just fish down that rocky bank and gravel with it. You never know where those fish are gonna be. In the springtime, they're moving in and out of those coves a lot. They're really migrating a lot, and you're apt to catch one anywhere with it. But obviously, like anything else, your high percentage areas are gonna be any type of shallow cover around it. Another really important thing to catch bass on a swim jig, especially as that water temperature starts to get around 60, is shade. Bass will use shade just like cover, and shade is critical for a swim jig a lot of times. So if I see any shade on the bank, like the shade of an overhanging tree or, you know, something, anything that's creating shade, maybe the angle of the bank, I really work that shade pretty hard with it. And then you definitely want to use here's the two trailers I talked about are the Speed Craw and the Z Craw here. You definitely always want to use some type of a wiggling, tailed trailer on there. I've caught a few just on like the pork frog type trailers, but you get a lot more bites with the action of something like this with it. But anyway, guys, it is an excellent bait to catch shallow fish. It's a really good bait to catch fish that are hard to catch with other techniques because it's a subtle bait. It doesn't make any noise. You're fishing it in extremely shallow water. It's very, very subtle. And, a lot of times those fish that are really spooky in shallow water, they'll respond to a swim jig when they won't hardly anything else. And it's like any other part of fishing. It's like they want a swim jig when they want a swim jig. So they sort of have to be in that right mood and personality for it. Normally, you're going to find that the better swim jig days are those days that are more conducive to the fish being a little bit more active, which is like a south wind, some type of overcast, maybe some humidity in the air, a steady or falling barometric pressure, that type of a thing. Rain and cloud cover, that can be really good. If you would give me the perfect swim jig situation, this is what it would be in the springtime of the year. Give me water temperatures anywhere between like say 58 to 65 degrees. Give me water visibility of less than 2 foot, some type of a cloudy, misty type light rain day, and that's perfect situation for a swim jig. And another thing that works really good on a swim jig is any type of a lake that has very shallow aquatic vegetation. It's really good. Like prime example would be Lake Eufaula, Alabama. That lake has a lot of shallow vegetation that's in like less than 3 foot of water. That is when a swim jig really shines. Like all you guys that fish like the Coosa River lakes, like Logan Martin, where you got those water willows, perfect for a swim jig. Not that you have to have it because you can catch them, like I said, just on bare banks with it. But give it a try, guys. That's just some of the stuff that's worked for me with it. Like I said, this Ouzo swimmer, if you're looking for a swim jig or you've never tried it, guys, give that Ouzo swimmer a try. Like I said, I'll put that link in my Tackle Warehouse link. This thing is just freaking awesome. It's an awesome swim jig. You won't use any other swim jigs once you try this thing. It's just freaking the best one out there. So anyway, guys, hope it helps you catch some good fish. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll talk later.